Well, ever since Watchmen Chapter 2 came out, many of us were wondering about the future of DC animated movies. Batman Azteca is still coming our way, but it appeared like nothing else was being planned for the near future, and many people were speculating with James Gunn taking over the DCU, was this the end of the era of DC animated films as many of us have known it? But now, we've got a new update, and it appears DC animated films might still be alive and about to develop a classic Batman tale. Are you ready for Nightfall? Well, DC animated movies have really been a staple of the comic book world for a really long time. Going back over 20 years, we've gotten dozens of DC-based animated films from Warner Bros. Animation over the years. These have spanned multiple universes and reboots. And recently, we even saw what felt like a conclusion of many DC animated movies in that Crisis on Infinite Earths event film, which culminated in a full reboot of the Tomorrowverse. Now, since then, we had no announcements about future DC projects, and many of us, myself included, were starting to wonder if the future of DC animation was going to lie in DC Studios and with James Gunn, and if many of these other projects were going away. But luckily, we got a new report from DCU Films, and they pulled back the curtain on a pretty interesting detail and the possibility of what's happening moving forward. They recently made a report that DC Animation was developing an adaptation of the classic Batman story, Nightfall. Now, if you're familiar with Nightfall, it is the story where Bane actually breaks the bat. He breaks Batman's back, sending Batman into retirement, and Azrael, Jean-Paul Valley, takes over the role of Batman and creates a very early 1990s version of the character who was perfectly okay doing all the stuff typically Batman doesn't. Now, the full story saw Batman rise back to the occasion, heal, very similar to how he did in The Dark Knight Returns, and then recover his mantle of Batman. Now, this was a fairly unsubstantiated report, but then an entry into the EIDR was made, and that seemed to confirm what's going on. Now, the EIDR is an Entertainment Identifier Registry, and in case you don't know what they are, they're a non-profit organization that assigns unique identifiers to audio and video content. This has multiple purposes like streamlining supply chain and redundancies, but it is something that many Hollywood studios participate in and is often an early sign of potential projects getting developed. Now, what was uncovered is an entry for Batman Nightfall Part 1, which does seem to indicate not only are we going to get the Nightfall story, but it will be adapted in multiple parts. Now, DC had pretty good success with Crisis and Watchmen being a multi-part event, so I think they're taking that lesson into the future projects, and we're going to see way more of these multi-release adaptations. And if they're kicking it off with Nightfall, well, that would be pretty great. Honestly, I could see a full story here of 3 parts, just like DCU Films seem to scoop. With Part 1, seeing Batman face off and be defeated by Bane. Part 2, focus completely on the Azrael version of Batman in that epic suit from that era. And then Part 3, where Bruce returns to the cowl and takes back the mantle of Batman. Now, I think this could be a good win for Warner Bros. Animation, and definitely one of those Elseworld tales that I think James Gunn would be perfectly okay with. I don't think this is ever going to make it to the big screen or in live action, and that may have been why we saw some pauses on some of these events. I'm pretty sure Gunn, as head of DC Studios, wants to make sure whatever alternate Elseworlds animations are being made, they don't cross over or pull from some of his storylines. This is one of my theories on why we haven't seen much of Young Justice or heard any news on that. And Nightfall is one of those stories that can kind of live completely on its own and wouldn't really require any interaction with any other part of the universe. Now, at this point, nobody at DC or Warner Bros. Animation has officially announced the project, so we're going to have to sit back and wait, and hopefully we get something official. This might be just an early trickle or a placeholder, so until we get confirmation, we want to be very careful. But honestly, guys, I love this comic when it came out. It wasn't for everybody, but it was a new version of Batman that was much more Frank Castle than Bruce Wayne, and something I think will make a great animated adaptation. What do you guys think? Are you a fan of Batman Nightfall? And how do you feel about the DC animated universe potentially returning with this classic Batman tale? Tell me what you think in the comments below. Now, before you take off, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button, ring that bell for all the updates, and make sure you get every notification because we do daily Marvel and DC content and we don't want you to miss any news.